In the office, Jim Halpert lies to Dwight Schrute at Dwight's own wedding. And somehow it becomes one of the sweetest moments in the entire series. That's what makes the scene so interesting. Jim uses the same kind of trick he's been pulling on Dwight since the pilot. But this time, the prank feels like an act of love. Then, 30 seconds later, Jim turns to the camera and tells us exactly what he did. The cast had a name for that glance. The Jim look to camera. Jim's look to camera is a textbook example of breaking the fourth wall. He briefly steps outside the scene and shares a private reaction with us. Whenever Jim turns to the camera and tells us exactly what he did, Jim looks at us. The show is quietly telling us whose reaction to trust and whose side we're supposed to take. Go back to March of 2005. In the pilot episode, Jim puts Dwight's stapler in Jell-O. It's one of the first things we learn about either man. Dwight takes himself too seriously, and Jim knows exactly how to get under his skin. 9 seasons later, Jim is still fooling Dwight. The prank has become much more personal, but the camera presents it exactly the same way. The Office didn't work like most sitcoms on television at the time. It used one camera, shot everything like a documentary, and had no studio audience or laugh track. There was nobody off-screen telling us when something was funny. So the characters told us instead. They spoke directly to the camera during interviews. They glanced at it whenever something awkward happened. Jim and Pam did it constantly when Michael made everyone in the room uncomfortable. At first, those looks seemed to be about Michael. But Jim eventually starts using the same glance whenever he wants to share a joke with us. He looks over, we understand what he means, and suddenly, we're in on it with him. Dwight hasn't even reacted yet, and we're already on Jim's side. The crew thought carefully about where they placed that camera. The cinematographer had a rule for the interview shots. If a character seemed capable of building a life outside Dunder Mifflin, they sat in front of a window with the outside world behind them. If they seemed stuck, the camera pointed them back toward the office. If you wanted, the office explained through a single camera angle. This one gets pretty close. Jim has the world behind him and the audience sitting beside him. Jim sat in front of the window. Dwight got his own interviews, of course. He could sit down and speak straight into the lens, just like everyone else. But the audience didn't have the same relationship with him. When Jim looked at the camera, it felt like he was checking in with us. When Dwight looked at it, we usually watched him put on a performance. The episode Product Recall from April of 2007 shows the difference perfectly. Jim comes to work dressed as Dwight. He buys $4 drugstore glasses, puts on a short-sleeved shirt, and parts his hair flat across his forehead. The whole costume costs $11. Jim doesn't just dress like Dwight, he copies his voice, his posture, and that way Dwight turns every opinion into a fact. Then Jim starts arguing about bears, beets, and Battlestar Galactica. And Dwight responds with the line everybody remembers. Identity theft is not a joke, Jim. Millions of families suffer every year. Millions of families suffer every year. Dwight's anger becomes the punchline. We don't stop to think about how it might feel to watch a coworker copy your clothes, your voice, and your entire personality. Dwight responds in the most dramatic way possible, so we laugh at him again. Jim started by taking Dwight's stapler. 2 years later, he's taking Dwight's identity. But Dwight gets him back before the episode ends. He walks into the office dressed as Jim, and even tries Jim's famous look at the camera. It doesn't land. The people who made the episode said it just felt awkward. Dwight gives the same look to the same camera, but it doesn't work because we don't see him the way we see Jim. The show also makes it easy to forget how often Jim does this. One prank ends, the episode resets, and the next prank feels like a completely separate joke. Unless somebody sits down and counts them, they never really feel like a pattern. In May of 2006, the episode Conflict Resolution finally counts them. It starts with another ordinary Jim prank. He makes Dwight's identification badge 5 by 7 inches, labels him a security threat, and changes his middle name from Kurt to Fart. By this point, that barely feels unusual. Then Michael finds out that Dwight has been filing complaints about Jim for years. He brings everyone into the conference room and reads them aloud. Jim replaced Dwight's pens and pencils with crayons. He convinced the office to call him Dwayne. He hid a bloody glove in Dwight's desk. He reported an abandoned baby in the women's bathroom. He slowly filled Dwight's telephone headset with nickels, waited until Dwight adjusted to the extra weight, and then removed them so Dwight would hit himself in the face. He changed Dwight's name in the computer so it automatically corrected to diaper. He moved Dwight's desk toward the copier a few inches at a time until Dwight realized he was sitting in a completely different place. Some of those pranks took weeks. Jim designed them so Dwight wouldn't notice what was happening until it was over. Dwight did exactly what an employee is supposed to do. He filed complaints with his manager. Nobody cared. Eventually, Dwight walks into Michael's office and gives him a choice. Either Jim gets fired or Dwight quits. For once, the show puts years of Jim's behavior in one room and makes everyone listen to it. Jim looks genuinely shaken, but he doesn't spend much time thinking about what any of it did to Dwight. Instead, he starts wondering whether his own life is sad. Maybe he sucks. Maybe he has wasted years of his life doing this. Michael has just read a list of things Jim did to Dwight, and Jim hears it as a warning about Jim's career. The episode follows him there. Dwight shows him a notice for an open job in Stamford, and Jim secretly interviews for it without telling anyone. Even when Dwight's complaints finally get heard, the story quickly becomes about Jim wanting more from his life. Now, Jim does have a fair defense. Dwight fights back. His Jim costume and product recall is a real counterattack, and Jim respects how accurate it is. In that moment, they look like two co-workers playing a game they both understand. And sometimes Jim's pranks actually work out well for Dwight. Take the episode Dwight's Speech from March of 2006. Dwight has to speak at a sales convention. Jim claims he studied public speaking and tells Dwight to wave his arms and pound his fist. Then he hands Dwight a speech built from Mussolini's 1914 argument for Italy to enter the First World War, with lines from a few other dictators mixed in. It opens with, "Blood alone moves the wheels of history." Dwight follows Jim's advice, walks onto the stage, and brings the house down. The extras in the audience got so excited during the first take that the directors had to tell them to calm down. Otherwise, the joke wouldn't read properly on screen. That's not the story of Jim tormenting some helpless victim. Jim sets Dwight up to look ridiculous, and Dwight turns the whole thing into a victory. There's no reason to pretend Jim wanted the speech to fail. The episode never says that. But he still sends Dwight onto a stage with a fascist speech and never tells him where it came from. Jim expects the audience at home to laugh because Dwight has no idea what he's saying. Dwight succeeds because he commits to the speech completely. He had also beaten Jim for Salesman of the Year and spent the week bragging about it, so Jim had a reason to knock him down a little. Maybe there was some affection behind the advice. There usually is with Jim and Dwight, but Dwight deserves the credit for turning Jim's setup into a great moment. Dwight getting revenge doesn't change the way the show frames their relationship. Dwight's pranks usually last for a scene and disappear. Jim starts in the pilot episode and keeps going. By the time we reach the office ending, those pranks have become part of why people like him. Conflict Resolution is one of the only episodes that asks us to think about all of those pranks together. And even then, the story moves from Dwight's complaints to Jim's unhappiness at work. If Jim's pranks were equally charming, from Dwight's point of view, then none of this would depend on the camera. A Dwight-centered episode could show the same behavior and make Jim seem just as lovable. But that almost never happens. Season 9's The Farm was built around Dwight as a possible spin-off, and Jim doesn't prank him once. Season 7's Dwight K. Schrute acting manager includes the fake uprising known as the Fist. Dwight's speech includes Jim's bad advice. But even in those episodes, the prank scenes usually begin with Jim's idea and Jim's reaction. When Dwight truly becomes the center of the story, Jim's usual prank often disappears. Then we reach Dwight's wedding. Before the ceremony, Jim tells Dwight that the minister has reminded him of an old Schrute rule. The best-ish mensch has to be older than the groom. Since Jim is younger than Dwight, he sadly has to step down. Jim has invented a rule about Dwight's own family and blamed it on the minister so Dwight can't argue. He knows Dwight cares deeply about Schrute history, family tradition, and following rules correctly. So he builds the lie out of the exact things Dwight trusts most. It's the stapler prank after 9 years of practice. Jim now knows Dwight well enough to design a lie that fits him perfectly. Then Jim steps aside and brings out Michael Scott. This time, Jim isn't trying to embarrass Dwight. He gives up his place and hands it to the one person Dwight would rather have beside him. Dwight can barely believe it. "I can't believe you came." The emotion is completely real. Jim has given his friend something wonderful. He also lied to Dwight on his wedding day, and the lie only works because Jim understands him better than almost anyone else does. Then Jim turns to the camera and calls it the best prank ever. Those are his words, and he delivers them through the same camera he has been looking into since the Jell-O. The trick, the glance, and Jim's explanation all happen together. And after 9 seasons of seeing Dwight through Jim's eyes, the prank feels loving. There's one more strange detail. The Schrutes get married while standing in open graves they dug themselves. The graves remind them that death is the only escape from the commitment they're about to make. So Dwight walks toward his wedding only minutes after his best friend lies to him about his own family history. And he has never looked happier. It's fair to call that love. Jim clearly loves Dwight. The show never hid the pranks from us. We watched every one of them happen, but we almost always watched them from Jim's side. For 9 years, Jim looked into the camera at exactly the right moment. We knew what the look meant, and it made us feel included. We didn't feel like we were judging Dwight. We felt like Jim had invited us into the joke. After a while, that changed the way we saw both of them. We didn't sit down and decide that Dwight deserved everything Jim did to him. The show placed us beside Jim, and eventually that seat started to feel natural. Jim loved Dwight. That part was always real. But Jim wasn't the only one deciding how we saw their relationship. The camera picked our seat before we even entered the room. It's funny because Jim gets every detail right. But the prank also shows how closely he's been watching Dwight. Jim knows his voice, his habits, and exactly what will set him off. You don't imitate someone that well unless you know them incredibly well. And some might also say that you don't imitate someone unless you, dare I say, love them. That's Jim and Dwight.